Thanks for joining us today. This is
Thank
Stan
you.
Reiss from Matrix Partners, and we'll be asking you a couple of questions about your experience as a venture investor. You must have seen countless pitches in your time as an investor. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, what are some common mistakes that you find first-time entrepreneurs make when pitching an investor?
Probably the single most common mistake that people make is people assume that they have all the answers, and you'll see a pitch that says, here's everything we've lined out, here's what the company's going to be worth, here's what the company's worth today, and you end up looking like an academic who does not in touch with the real world. And the takeaway almost always from an investor is to get turned off by something like that. That's one thing. And another thing that people do, a very simple thing, but people don't talk about themselves or their team and in a positive fashion. People are often shy, or people feel that they ought to be modest. They're they're supposed to be selling themselves. They're supposed to be selling their team. In the end, we're going to back them and we're going to back their team. And a lot of modesty in that case, or putting the team chart way in the back, ends up making the audience feel that they have nothing to say about themselves. And then that comes off pretty weak.
As a university, we have a lot of scientists who are looking to launch their first company.
Yeah.
When you look at a pitch team coming in to talk to you,
Yeah.
that's comprised primarily of scientists, either the faculty member or their grad students from the lab.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of the differences between what they should be highlighting versus what they typically do about their backgrounds? How important is prior experience as the evaluation criteria when you're looking for a team to back?
Yeah, it's not critical, right? Clearly, if your last company was sold for $1 billion, then we're going to be everybody's going to be very serious about it. But the venture industry has become increasingly cognizant over the last few years of the fact that young people or inexperienced people can start pretty great companies. A lot of our best companies have been started by inexperienced people, so that's okay. That's not a problem. I think what's important is understanding where you have to fill out the team. I think when we see worst case academic teams are 5 business school students all want to do marketing, right? Or 4 scientists who say we don't really never need a business guy, and maybe one of them is sometimes a scientist can make a great business guy, but sometimes they can't, and they have to be self-aware of what it is that they have with them, they have with their team, and often, unfortunately, the worst case scenario thing that we see with the universities is people that come in and say, this is a great company, I want to do this, I deserve to own a huge percentage of it, but I'm only going to do it part-time. And folks have to realize that everybody they're competing against is working 80 hours a week on the thing that they're competing with you against, and venture folks really aren't interested in backing part-time projects. So when we see a academic project that's got a professor and a postdoc and some grad students, we tend to be much more interested in the postdoc and the grad students than the professor, even though the professor may be an incredibly smart, incredibly famous person. If they're not going to leave their job, they're just going to be an advisor to the company.
I see. And is there an ideal role that you do see for the PI, for the faculty member?
Yeah, definitely. And it's worked a few times. So I've done a number of projects out of universities, and it turns out what faculty members tend to be really good at is advising. They're really good at sitting down with a team, which is in the middle of a hard problem, and coming up with ideas that maybe come from broad disciplines for how to approach that problem. And that role is great because that's a part-time role. That's a role in which they can continue doing their day job. It's similar to what they do with grad students. They're working in their on their day-to-day basis, and it's huge value add because when everybody in a company is heads down, sometimes it's hard to poke your head up and look at a different approach to solve the problem they're working on.
So across the investments you've made, especially in these early stage technologies, do you have a sense of what percentage of those typically will get to having a product in the market in some form or other, setting aside eventual financial success?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question to ask. So I tend to do a lot of investments that have a lot of technical risk, and I think a lot of university startups have a lot of technical risk. And some percentage of the time, the stuff just doesn't work. And that's very, very different. So that one is hard to handicap because it's different every single time, depending on how difficult a problem you've chosen to bite off. If the product works, and you have a good team and good backers, most of the time you're going to get a product in the market. You know, if the technology works, most of the time you're going to get a product in the market. And then the question is, it commercially makes sense, and all those kinds of things, that comes into play, and what your competitors have done and
Right.
other people figure
Right.
out.
So success has a lot of different factors that go into it.
There are a lot of factors.
Yeah,
in
that makes
success.
sense. What kind of technologies is Matrix looking at these days? Where are your investment priorities?
You know, we're across the board. There are 8 partners, 8 sets of folks with 8 sets of ideas for what's interesting. There are some areas that we individually, people care a lot about. People care a lot about clearly everything that's going on online. People care a lot about infrastructure to support that. Care about mobile. Care a lot about how do we make a phone better, make a phone last longer, make a screen better. There are technologies that play into those trends. There are some areas that have been increasingly important over time, like security has become increasingly important as bad guys have gotten much more sophisticated, and they've become much more likely to be nation states. And there's some areas like, for example, healthcare, where the world is changing. The U.S. healthcare system is changing in a pretty dramatic way, and there are clearly going to be opportunities for startups to play in an interesting fashion, and on the making healthcare more efficient side. And for a long time, they've been doing drugs and devices. That's actually been, it's not an area we invest in, but I think in general that's become a more difficult area to invest in of late because of the price pressure on the healthcare system. But the price pressure also means that the system has to be re-architected, and that's where technology comes into play.
Does Matrix have a preferred stage of investment that you typically like to join the company with?
Yeah, our strategy is to be the first investor. So we invest at the seed stage or at the A round stage almost exclusively. We've broken that here and there for a great investment, but the strategy is to be the first professional money in.
There are many folks in the regional economic development ecosystem or the university ecosystem that are trying to provide resources for entrepreneurs to help them learn entrepreneurship, grow their companies with some sort of safety net, whether it's entrepreneurship classes or incubators or connections to mentors and advisors. Do you feel like entrepreneurship is a teachable skill?
It's a good question. Are you born with it or are you not born with it? Listen, I think it's like a lot of things. You probably have to have some predilection for entrepreneurship in order to be interested in it. What is absolutely teachable, and it has changed very much to the positive in the last few years, is the idea that entrepreneurship is a viable career choice. When I was in school 20 years ago, entrepreneurship was thought of as something that crazy people did. They're the same folks that go base jumping off of cliffs are the people that are likely to start companies, and any sane person is going to go work for McKinsey or Goldman Sachs. I think the world has changed in terms of it's absolutely far less risky to have an entrepreneurial career. Maybe feel more risky at any given Friday, but over a period of time, it's far less risky than it used to be. And people can be taught and shown that, and I think they really are learning. Now, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, there's certain sets of skills that you can learn, and classes help with those skills. But I think the biggest advantage of the resources that you mentioned is showing people the way, showing people that it's a possibility.
And you started off your career at McKinsey, if I remember that correctly.
I did.
Looking back now, if you knew then what you know now, do you still think you would have gone into consulting as a first?
No. Listen, McKinsey is a great place. It's a terrific firm. It was a great, for me, it was a great education that I got there. But absolutely, I think if I was a young person graduating right now, going to work for an exciting, smaller company is just a great thing to do, and you learn much more hands-on skills. You learn skills that you can apply to running a company yourself at some point. At the bigger consulting firms, you really learn how very large organizations work. You don't learn how small fly-by-wire bubblegum and duct tape organizations work, which is what you need to do if you're doing startups.
Right. As an investor as part of a firm with a presence on the West Coast and a presence in Boston, and investments here in New York,
Yeah.
you're in a somewhat unique opportunity to see how these different ecosystems have evolved
Yeah.
and where their future is ahead. What are your observations about the trend in New York City, early stage technology startups?
Well, boy, New York has taken off over the last few years, and it used to be really not a particularly relevant market for startups because all the smart people in New York went to the banks and to make oodles of money. It's changed a lot, and it's changed a lot in large part because there's been it's become a lot easier to start a company where you don't necessarily need to be the engineer to lead it. And I think New York has a huge number of people who understand marketing, understand consumers, understand how to product, understand how to get to customers. It is not the world's strongest technical pool. Every startup that I know in New York is always struggling for hiring engineers. They're here, but it's a little bit of a struggle. But now that you can start a company based on those other areas, New York is just flourishing. And what that has done, because New York is such a cool place to live, particularly for young people, has gotten engineers to move here, and it's solving a lot of the other issues that are around. So my belief and our firm's belief is that it's an ecosystem very much on the rise, and it's going to continue to rise. Hopefully we need more startup ecosystems. So it's very good for everybody.
Great. Thanks very much. Appreciate it, Stan.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.